It starts with a dream, a hope for a better life, the promise of love, and a future filled with possibility. But sometimes, dreams take a dark turn, and those we trust the most can become our worst nightmare. This is the harrowing tale of Amber Morris, a young woman whose bright future was tragically cut short by the man she thought she could trust, Jeremy Gomez, a celebrated football star whose charisma and talent masked a chilling secret. A story of love, betrayal, and unimaginable violence that left an entire country in shock and mourning. Amber Morris was no ordinary woman. Born in a small town on the outskirts of São Paulo, she grew up with big dreams. From an early age, Amber knew she was destined for something greater than the modest life she had. Her radiant smile, striking beauty, and fierce determination earned her the admiration of everyone she met. But Amber wasn't just a beautiful face. She had a heart full of ambition. She wanted to make her mark on the world, not just as a model but as an actress, a role model, someone who could inspire other young girls like her to reach for the stars. At just 21 years old, Amber's career was beginning to take off. She had landed small gigs in commercials and was a familiar face on the runway at local fashion shows. Though she faced countless challenges, Amber had a unique ability to rise above adversity with grace. She was the epitome of resilience, a quality she credited to her humble upbringing and her mother, who always reminded her to fight for her worth. It was during one of these fashion events in Rio de Janeiro that Amber met Jeremy Gomez, a man whose reputation preceded him. Jeremy was 27 years old, a rising star in the Brazilian football scene. With his chiseled jawline, captivating smile, and effortless charisma, Jeremy was adored by fans and feared by opponents on the field. He was a man who seemingly had it all: wealth, fame, and a promising career. To the outside world, he was a golden boy, an icon of Brazilian football who was destined for greatness. When Amber and Jeremy's paths crossed, it felt like destiny, or so it seemed. The two were introduced at an exclusive party after one of Jeremy's victorious matches. Surrounded by flashing cameras, glitzy lights, and the who's who of Brazil's social elite, Jeremy was instantly taken by Amber. She stood out in the crowd, not just for her beauty but for her genuine, down-to-earth demeanor. Amber, on the other hand, was initially hesitant. She had heard the rumors about Jeremy, about his playboy lifestyle, but his charm was undeniable. They exchanged numbers that night, and what started as casual conversations quickly grew into something deeper. Or at least that's what Amber believed. Jeremy made her feel special, showering her with expensive gifts and affection. To her, he was the man who could take her dreams to the next level, the one who would protect her and support her ambitions. But behind Jeremy's dazzling smile was a darker side. A side he had carefully concealed from the world and, most importantly, from Amber. Their relationship became the talk of the town. Paparazzi followed their every move, capturing images of the glamorous couple dining at the finest restaurants, attending high-profile events, and vacationing in exotic locations. To the public, they were a picture-perfect duo, the stunning model and the star athlete, a modern-day fairy tale. But as we all know, fairy tales aren't real, and behind closed doors, the cracks in their relationship were beginning to show. Amber's close friends started noticing changes in her. She seemed distant, distracted, and sometimes even nervous in Jeremy's presence. They noticed how her phone calls with them became less frequent and how she began withdrawing from social circles. When they asked if everything was okay, Amber would put on a brave face, insisting that Jeremy was simply misunderstood and that their relationship had its ups and downs like any other. What she didn't tell them, or perhaps couldn't bring herself to admit, was that the man she had fallen in love with was becoming someone she barely recognized. Jeremy, once the charming, attentive boyfriend, began showing signs of jealousy and possessiveness. What began as small arguments over her career choices escalated into full-blown fights about who she could and couldn't talk to. Amber was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to keep the peace while holding on to the relationship she had invested so much in. Little did Amber know, Jeremy's dark side ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. His temper, which he had hidden so well in public, began to surface in private. The man who once lavished her with gifts and promises of love was slowly becoming controlling, erratic, and at times, cruel. But like so many victims in similar situations, Amber clung to the hope that things would get better, that the man she fell in love with was still there, somewhere beneath the surface. As their relationship unraveled, those closest to Amber began to worry. Her once vibrant spirit seemed dimmed, replaced by a quiet sadness she refused to explain. When she did talk about Jeremy, it was with a mixture of love and frustration, a clear sign that she was trapped in a toxic cycle she couldn't easily escape. And while she held on to hope, Jeremy's behavior was growing increasingly unpredictable. Amber didn't know it at the time, but she was becoming ensnared in a dangerous web, a web that would ultimately lead to one of the most shocking crimes Brazil had ever witnessed. What started as a love story would soon unravel into a tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and violence, leaving an entire nation grappling with the devastating aftermath. And so, this is where our story begins. A young woman's journey of ambition and love. A rising star's dangerous descent into darkness, and the devastating collision of their two lives. As we dive deeper into this tragic tale, we'll uncover the truth about what happened to Amber Morris and the chilling details of a crime that could have been prevented. But first, let's go back to where it all started. A moment that seemed like the beginning of a dream, but in reality, was the start of a nightmare. Amber's early life was far from the glamorous existence she had dreamed about. Growing up in a small neighborhood outside Sao Paulo, her world was a lot more modest, and her family's financial struggles were something she tried hard to escape. Despite the challenges, Amber never let her circumstances define her. She was a bright, passionate young woman, with the kind of optimism that seemed unbreakable. Whether it was in the classroom, on stage, or in front of a camera, Amber had a special way of standing out. From a very young age, she dreamed of a life far beyond what her hometown had to offer. She would spend hours flipping through magazines, watching movies, and imagining herself on the covers of the world's most famous publications. Amber wasn't just driven by her looks. She had the kind of fire inside her that made people take notice. She knew that if she worked hard enough, she could make her dream a reality. She spent years honing her skills, taking small jobs here and there, and attending every modeling audition she could find. Her big break came when she was discovered at a local fashion show in Rio de Janeiro, a bustling city known for its vibrant culture and beauty scene. Her strong, fierce presence on the runway caught the attention of several key players in the fashion world. Soon after, Amber's phone began ringing with offers from agencies and photographers. Little by little, she started building a name for herself. What was once a small-town dream was rapidly turning into a full-blown reality. But being a young model in a cutthroat industry was never easy. Amber had to navigate the harsh realities of the business. Constant rejections, long hours, and intense pressure to maintain the perfect image. Still, she never wavered. She held onto her dreams tightly, believing that with time, she would find not only success but the opportunity to break into acting, her true passion. Amber was ambitious. She wanted to be more than just a model. She wanted to be an actress, an icon, a role model. She believed that one day, she would inspire countless others to follow their own dreams, no matter where they came from. While Amber was fighting for her career in the spotlight, Jeremy Gomez's rise to fame was no less impressive. Born in the city of Belo Horizonte, Jeremy grew up playing football in the streets with his friends, dreaming of a life where he could earn a living doing what he loved. His talent was undeniable from a young age. By the time he was a teenager, he was already playing at elite clubs in Brazil, quickly catching the eye of coaches and scouts. His agile moves on the field, his strong leadership as a goalkeeper, and his fierce determination made him stand out among the best. Soon enough, Jeremy's skills led him to one of Brazil's biggest football teams. He became the star goalkeeper, and with his rise in the sport came fame and money. As the media fawned over his incredible saves and his strong performances in major tournaments, Jeremy found himself thrust into the limelight. His every move was followed by eager fans, and his image was plastered all over billboards, magazines, and television screens. Fans loved him. His fans adored him. He was admired on the field, where his athleticism and success took him to great heights. Off the field, however, his personal life started to show a different story. Jeremy was known to have a fiery temperament. While many saw him as a kind, generous man, close sources began to reveal a darker side. Behind the charming smile and the good looks, there was a man who struggled with anger and poor impulse control. Those who had been around him long enough knew that Jeremy could be unpredictable, and there were whispers about his tumultuous relationships with women and his tendency to bottle up his emotions, only to let them explode when they became too much to handle. Jeremy's public persona was that of a confident, untouchable football star, but behind closed doors, he was hiding a lot of personal issues. It was clear that the pressure of constant media scrutiny, combined with the weight of his fame, had started to take its toll. Jeremy's personal relationships seemed to suffer as he juggled the demands of his career with the emotional chaos brewing in his life. It was at one of Rio de Janeiro's most luxurious parties that Amber and Jeremy first met. Their chemistry was instant, magnetic. Jeremy, despite his fame, seemed genuinely interested in her, not just her beauty, but her drive and ambitions. Amber, in turn, saw Jeremy as the man who could help her take her career to the next level. The two hit it off quickly, beginning a whirlwind relationship that was often the talk of the Brazilian tabloids. They went on countless dates to the finest restaurants and the most glamorous vacation spots, but not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Underneath the glamour and excitement, Amber began to see warning signs in Jeremy's behavior. His charm began to wear off as his jealousy and control issues started to surface. Arguments between them started to occur more frequently, over her friends, her career, and her autonomy. Still, Amber was determined to make it work. She thought Jeremy could change, that they were meant to be together, even as his darker tendencies became harder to ignore. Then came the news that would change everything. Amber was pregnant. The announcement should have been one of joy, but for Jeremy, it was met with resistance. He reacted poorly to the news. At first, he denied it. His initial reaction was that of anger and disbelief, refusing to take responsibility for what had happened. For Amber, the news of her pregnancy should have been the beginning of a new chapter, one in which they would navigate parenthood together. But for Jeremy, it was an obstacle he wasn't prepared for, one that would lead to even more tension in their already fragile relationship. Amber found herself in an increasingly difficult position, caught between her love for Jeremy and the overwhelming fear that he might not be ready for the responsibility of fatherhood. She had always been strong, ambitious, and independent, but suddenly, she was forced to reckon with the realities of being pregnant, unsure of what the future might hold. Little did she know, the fallout from Jeremy's refusal to accept responsibility would soon lead to a devastating series of events that no one could have predicted. As Amber's pregnancy began to progress, the tension between her and Jeremy escalated. What should have been a time of connection and new beginnings instead became a battleground. Amber was determined to keep the baby, despite the pushback from Jeremy, who was still not ready to accept his role as a father. Amber wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her son's future. She had already made up her mind. She would raise her child no matter what, and no matter how much resistance she faced. With each passing day, Amber's resolve grew stronger. She decided to take matters into her own hands and filed lawsuits against Jeremy for child support. Amber knew she was putting herself in a difficult position, but she couldn't let him off the hook. Her actions came with a cost, Jeremy's feelings of betrayal. The more Amber pushed for support, the more resentment brewed in him. He saw her determination as an attack on his pride, his reputation. A rising football star, Jeremy had everything to lose if Amber went public with the situation. He didn't want to be seen as the man who abandoned his pregnant ex-girlfriend, or the father who wouldn't take responsibility. But the resentment festered inside him, growing to an uncontrollable level. The tension between Amber and Jeremy soon turned from resentment to something much darker. Jeremy's frustration reached a boiling point. In his mind, the problem wasn't just the child. It was Amber herself. He couldn't have her claiming the upper hand, demanding things from him that he wasn't willing to give. Behind closed doors, Jeremy began scheming. It wasn't just a matter of ignoring Amber anymore. It was about silencing her once and for all. He recruited a few people to help him execute a plan. But Jeremy wasn't going to act alone. His wife, who had been suspicious of the entire affair from the beginning, was in on it too. She was fiercely protective of her family's image and believed that Amber needed to be removed from the picture. Her role would be crucial in the scheme that was about to unfold. On top of that, Jeremy involved a close cousin who had always been in and out of trouble. This cousin had the kind of connections that Jeremy could use to execute his plans without attracting too much attention. They would operate from the shadows, using their combined resources to make sure Amber couldn't fight back. The pieces were falling into place, and soon enough, the wheels of their horrifying plan were set into motion. It all began with a phone call that Amber received one fateful afternoon. Jeremy said he wanted to meet, to talk about their son. He knew how much Amber loved their child, and he used this against her. He lured her with promises of discussing the baby's future, of discussing his responsibilities as a father. He made it sound like it would be a peaceful conversation, a chance for them to perhaps find some understanding. Amber, still holding out hope that she and Jeremy could work something out, agreed to meet him. She believed that this would be a moment of reconciliation for them, a way to make sense of everything and focus on their unborn child. She had no idea it would be the last decision of her life. But the meeting Amber had agreed to was far from a conversation. It was a trap. Once Amber arrived at the location Jeremy suggested, everything changed. The doors she once trusted, the person she once loved, were now a gateway to something sinister. As she walked in, she found herself surrounded, not just by Jeremy, but by his accomplices as well. Her heart began to race, but she tried to stay calm. Jeremy was there, acting like everything was fine, but his eyes were cold, the warmth gone. Before Amber could make sense of what was happening, they were on her. She didn't even have the chance to call for help. In an instant, she was overpowered and forced into a dark, enclosed space. It was Jeremy who held the reins now, and Amber, once a confident, independent woman, had no choice but to obey. The only thing that mattered to her at that moment was her safety. But even as she tried to negotiate, and tried to ask them why this was happening, the situation only grew more violent and twisted. Jeremy and his accomplices took her to a secluded location, far away from the eyes of any witnesses. Amber, still not fully understanding the horror unfolding around her, tried desperately to maintain a shred of hope. In that moment, all she wanted was to go home, to return to her safe life, to escape the nightmare she had found herself in. But her voice, once so full of ambition and promise, was now just a whisper in the wind. The hours that followed were unimaginable. They locked Amber away, and for days she was held in captivity, tortured and beaten. Her cries for help echoed in the void, falling on deaf ears. But even in that hellish reality, Amber never gave up. She fought with everything she had, with all the strength and love she had for her son, hoping that someone would come to rescue her. But no one did. Jeremy's cruel plot had reached its inevitable conclusion. Amber's life, which had been filled with so much hope and promise, was violently taken from her. The manner of her death shocked everyone who learned of it. Jeremy and his accomplices didn't just take her life. They sought to erase every trace of her existence. The plan was executed with chilling precision. After killing Amber, they disposed of her body in the most barbaric way possible, feeding it to dogs. The grotesque nature of this act stunned the world, and its details would haunt anyone who heard it. No one could believe that someone with Jeremy's public image, someone with his kind of talent and charm, could be capable of such horrific cruelty. The brutality of her murder, combined with the sheer thoughtlessness of her killers, left a community reeling. Amber had simply been fighting for her right to raise her child, but that small act of defiance had cost her everything. And now, her life, her story, was bound to become a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind fame and power. It wasn't just the nature of the crime that left people in shock. It was the way everything had been planned and orchestrated. Evidence soon came to light that showed the killing was premeditated. Jeremy had not acted out of blind anger in a fit of rage. He had calculated every move, made sure every detail was in place to ensure that Amber would never have the chance to fight back. Jeremy and his team of accomplices had planned this from the very start. Now, Amber's fate was sealed, but this crime was far from over. The search for answers would uncover even darker truths about the players involved, and the investigation would reveal shocking connections that no one ever expected. But in the meantime, the world was left to ask how something so cold-hearted could happen. and why someone who had everything to lose would go so far to erase the woman who wanted nothing more than to give her child a better life. The shocking disappearance of Amber Morris quickly garnered widespread media attention. When she was reported missing, her friends and family couldn't understand what could have happened. Amber had been planning a future for herself, working hard to balance her career ambitions and motherhood. But now, she had simply vanished. As days turned to weeks and there were no signs of her return, the media picked up the story, and the entire country became captivated by her mysterious disappearance. The initial investigation was difficult, as there were few clues and little information. Amber's family struggled with the uncertainty, desperately holding on to the hope that she might turn up alive, that the woman who had been so full of life would return to them. However, the lack of clear leads created an overwhelming sense of despair for everyone who knew her. But as time passed, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a tip-off from an anonymous individual. This individual spoke about a meeting Amber had arranged to confront Jeremy, but the tipper claimed it was all part of a plan to silence her. Another tip came, alleging that Jeremy might be involved in something far darker than anyone had imagined. Soon, the investigation took on a new dimension, and suspicions were raised about the involvement of not only Jeremy but also those close to him. Detectives began connecting the dots, reviewing Amber's past interactions with Jeremy. They traced back to the time when she first accused him of not taking responsibility for their child, and that accusation would prove to be a key factor in unraveling the events that led to her death. A friend who had seen Amber meeting Jeremy prior to her disappearance came forward with a crucial statement. The investigators listened intently, piecing together the picture of what had occurred. Soon, the investigation led them to Jeremy's cousin, someone with a known history of criminal activity. Under questioning, the cousin began to break down. The truth, long buried beneath layers of denial, came pouring out. After hours of interrogation, the cousin finally confessed, revealing chilling details of the entire plot. It turned out that this family member had helped Jeremy orchestrate the entire tragedy, and in return, Jeremy had promised him a favor. Jeremy's cousin had helped with the kidnapping, keeping Amber in captivity for a few days before the horrific murder took place. With this new revelation, the police were able to piece together the final parts of the puzzle. Amber's kidnapping was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It had been planned carefully over several weeks. The investigation revealed that Jeremy had plotted everything meticulously, including enlisting the help of his wife, who had a critical role in keeping Amber subdued during her final moments. The details grew darker as police uncovered more evidence of Jeremy's direct involvement in the abduction and the chilling way in which he and his accomplices disposed of Amber's body. As Jeremy's role in the crime became more apparent, the search for him intensified. Law enforcement officials worked tirelessly, determined to bring him and his accomplices to justice. Jeremy tried to avoid being caught, going into hiding for a short time. He thought he could outsmart the system that had now turned on him, but the investigation and the witnesses began to pile up, tightening the noose around his neck. With the help of his cousin's confession, it became clear that there was no escaping the truth. The arrest was dramatic. Jeremy, still thinking he could evade justice, was eventually tracked down and taken into custody. The arrest of a professional football player, once a beloved public figure, shocked fans and people across the country. How could someone with so much talent and fame commit such a heartless crime? There was no understanding of how a man who could inspire millions on the field could turn into a ruthless criminal behind closed doors. When news broke of Jeremy's arrest, the reaction was nothing short of outrage. People couldn't comprehend the reality of what had occurred. The man they once idolized had played a role in a gruesome and cold-blooded act. Amber had been nothing but a young woman with dreams of a bright future, yet her life was taken so mercilessly. Social media erupted with public condemnation. People across the world called for justice to be served, demanding accountability from Jeremy and those who helped him. The outrage came not just from fans who mourned the loss of the former sports star, but also from women everywhere who were appalled by the level of brutality shown to Amber. She was killed by someone she trusted, someone who was supposed to care for her. When the trial began, it was a spectacle. Amber's family showed up every day, sitting in the courtroom as the prosecutor laid out the details of the crime. They had waited for months, clinging to hope that one day they would get the justice that Amber so rightly deserved. As witnesses testified and evidence was presented, the world watched in stunned silence as the horrific actions of Jeremy and his accomplices were slowly exposed. One of the testimonies came from the cousin who had confessed. In chilling detail, he recounted the way in which Jeremy had plotted Amber's demise. He spoke of the meetings that had been held in secret, the threats that had been made, and the disturbing way in which Amber was treated in captivity. The cousin's testimony painted a horrifying picture of the actions Jeremy and his wife had taken. And then there were the other witnesses, people who had seen Amber meet Jeremy on the day she was taken, family members who recalled her distress after those initial phone calls. Their voices broke through the cold silence of the courtroom, a sobering reminder of the life Amber had been robbed of. Throughout the trial, Amber's family, though shattered, remained resolute. They had endured the pain of losing her, and now they had to endure the trauma of the details being laid bare in front of them. Every word in the courtroom seemed to cut through them like a knife, but they did not waver in their pursuit of justice for Amber. They wanted the world to know what happened, to make sure no one would ever forget her. The emotional toll was too much for many in the room, including the jury who had listened to each word, each detail. It wasn't just a case of criminal responsibility. It was a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a young woman who had just wanted to be a mother and a star. Now, she was gone, leaving her family to mourn and to fight for what was rightfully hers. Finally, after months of hearings, the verdict was handed down. The jury, after thoroughly deliberating, found Jeremy guilty of all charges related to the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Amber Morris. The sentence was just 22 years in prison for Jeremy, though many believed that the crime deserved much more. However, the punishment wasn't just for Jeremy alone. His accomplices received their own sentences. The cousin, who had played a critical role, was also convicted and sentenced to prison. And Jeremy's wife, who had been complicit in the crime, was given a sentence as well. The trial concluded with a final wave of sorrow and relief for Amber's family. Though it would never bring her back, they could now move forward knowing that those responsible for her tragic death had been held accountable. They hoped that, somehow, justice could serve as a small piece of comfort in the heartbreaking loss of a daughter, a sister, and a mother. The memory of Amber would never fade. Her story would continue to remind the world of the danger that lies hidden beneath the surface and the ways in which trust can so easily be betrayed. In 2017, just a few short years after his sentencing, Jeremy Gomez was released from prison due to a legal loophole. This was a twist that shocked the nation once more. He had been serving his time for a horrific crime, but through a technicality in the Brazilian legal system, his sentence was temporarily overturned. As the news broke, the world seemed to stop. How could a man who had committed such a gruesome act be allowed to walk free so soon? People felt betrayed, infuriated by the fact that the justice system had failed, even after everything that had happened. Amber's family was once again thrust into the public spotlight, forced to relive the agony of her death. They were horrified, knowing that the man who had ended their daughter's life, who had torn apart their family, was walking free. The emotional toll on her loved ones was insurmountable, but they refused to back down. They fought hard, raising their voices in protest and igniting an outcry from the public. The backlash was immense, not just from Amber's family, but from people across Brazil who had followed the case and seen Jeremy's release as nothing more than a stain on the country's legal system. It felt as though the justice they had fought so hard for had been stolen right out of their hands. Within months, public outrage forced a reassessment of the case, and thanks to continuous pressure and the tireless work of Amber's family, Jeremy was brought back to prison. It was a bittersweet moment of victory, but for many, it highlighted just how fragile the system could be when it came to protecting victims, particularly women. His release, followed by his eventual return to prison, laid bare the deep flaws in Brazil's criminal justice procedures. The case, though tragic, shed a glaring light on the need for reform, both in terms of how cases of violence are handled and how women's safety is prioritized. But the impact of Amber's story didn't end with Jeremy's sentence or the legal battles that followed. This tragedy sent shockwaves through Brazilian society, prompting a much-needed national conversation about domestic violence and systemic failures. Amber's death, tragic as it was, exposed the deep-rooted cultural and legal flaws that put many women at risk, particularly when it came to cases of domestic abuse, harassment, and violence. Amber had tried, over and over again, to hold her abuser accountable. She had fought for her right to raise her son, to be respected, and to have a future for herself. And in the end, she paid the price for trying to stand up for herself. Following Amber's story, the country saw an explosion of awareness campaigns that aimed to educate the public about the harsh realities many women face. Domestic violence hotlines were promoted more widely, and there was an increase in grassroots activism in support of victims. Amber's family, though grieving, became the faces of these efforts. They traveled the country, speaking out in Amber's memory, urging women to seek help and empowering them to stand against violence. It wasn't just about Amber's case. It was about preventing other women from experiencing the same devastating fate. Her name became a symbol for many, a rallying cry for justice, and a painful reminder that too many women had fallen through the cracks in the system. Beyond the legal system's failure, Amber's death forced many to realize the wider societal issues that allowed this crime to happen. People were shocked to learn how deep the roots of misogyny and domestic abuse went, how often women were silenced or ignored, and how their voices were dismissed in critical situations. These systemic failures resonated in conversations, workshops, and legal reforms aimed at better protecting the women of Brazil. Amber's legacy, though born from tragedy, became a powerful catalyst for change. The organization dedicated to spreading awareness of domestic violence in Brazil grew more popular every year. They held rallies, organized education programs, and helped victims escape abusive environments. Schools implemented more programs about healthy relationships and the importance of recognizing the signs of abuse. It wasn't just about Amber anymore. It was about creating a society where women could live free of fear, a society where people were no longer afraid to speak out against violence, and one where men like Jeremy Gomez would face consequences for their actions, no matter who they were. Amber's life may have been tragically cut short, but the ripple effect of her death continued to fuel positive change in Brazil. Her struggle was not in vain. The painful lessons learned from her murder compelled many to re-examine how women were treated in society and how they could be protected. Young girls who had watched Amber rise in the modeling world saw her death as a warning, a reminder to trust their instincts, to stand up for themselves, and to demand respect. These women, these children, and countless others were now empowered to say no more, to believe in their worth, and to fight against the silence. And for Amber's family, her legacy remains alive in the fight they continue to wage for women's safety. Her mother, her father, her friends, all of them work tirelessly to keep Amber's memory alive in the hope that future generations will not face the same fate. They live each day for Amber, telling her story so that no one ever forgets how one woman's life can change everything. Amber Morris may no longer be with us, but her name will never fade into the background. Her life, filled with dreams and aspirations, will forever be remembered as one full of resilience, strength, and a call for justice. It's a legacy that demands to be honored, not just in Brazil, but around the world. For the women still fighting against the injustices Amber tragically couldn't escape, for the daughters who will grow up hearing her story, and for everyone who believes in a safer future, Amber's spirit lives on in the continuing struggle to make the world a better, safer place for all. As we reflect on the life of Amber Morris and the horrifying events that led to her untimely death, the gravity of her story cannot be overstated. The pain, suffering, and injustice she endured at the hands of someone she trusted, someone who, by all appearances, seemed like a different person when the world was watching, stand as a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of many relationships. Amber's case unearths a truth that too often goes unnoticed in our society: the destructive power of domestic violence and how it can easily be hidden in plain sight. It shows us that behind the glamour of fame, the strength of charm, and the facade of civility, there may be a darker side to a person's character, one that preys on their victim, exploiting their trust, silencing their pleas, and ultimately robbing them of their lives. We must never forget that the public image we see on the outside does not always reflect the reality that people experience in the private corners of their lives. However, Amber's story is not just one of pain. It is also a story of resilience, courage, and the enduring strength of those who continue to fight for justice in the wake of unimaginable loss. Her family's refusal to let her death be forgotten, The way they've continued to advocate for women's rights, and the movement that has sparked in her name are all powerful demonstrations of how we can find light even in the darkest of circumstances. As painful as Amber's story is, it carries with it an important lesson for all of us. We cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the horrors of domestic violence. Each day that we choose silence or inaction is a day when more lives can be shattered. Each story that goes untold is an opportunity lost to make the world a safer place. What can we do? What can we as individuals, viewers, family members, friends, or even strangers do to address domestic violence and make a tangible impact? We can start by speaking up. We can spread awareness. We can listen when someone reaches out for help, even if it's hard to hear, even if it's uncomfortable. Amber's story has proven that silence has a cost, and the cost is too high. The more we talk about these issues, the less power they have over us, the less power they have over those who continue to suffer in silence. So, let us challenge ourselves, together, to break the silence. If you're watching this, you might already know someone who needs help, or you might be in a position to offer support to someone at risk. Be that support. Seek out resources in your community or online, whether it's through hotlines, shelters, or legal services. Encourage those around you to speak out when they're struggling and offer assistance when you can. It is these small, consistent actions that make all the difference in the lives of countless individuals. Amber's story didn't have to end the way it did. Had someone intervened sooner, had someone seen the warning signs and taken action, perhaps things could have been different. This is not just a lesson for Brazil or for the world at large. This is a lesson for each and every one of us who is watching. Whether we are victims or bystanders, we all play a role in shaping the kind of world we live in. By recognizing the signs of abuse and by standing up for the vulnerable, we can ensure that tragedies like Amber's become far less common. If you know someone who may be struggling in a toxic relationship, do not stay silent. If you sense that something isn't right, speak up gently, carefully, but firmly. Offer a listening ear, and if necessary, help guide them toward the support they deserve. There are many organizations, many resources available to offer assistance. We cannot allow ourselves to ignore the cries for help, no matter how subtle or hidden they may be. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such monstrous injustice, but we can turn that feeling of powerlessness into action. Sharing Amber's story, spreading awareness about the signs of domestic abuse, and supporting those in need are just a few of the things we can do to be advocates for change. Together, we can create a future where Amber's story is not repeated, a future where every woman and every man is treated with respect, dignity, and above all, the protection they deserve. So, as we leave this chapter behind, let's remember Amber's life not just in sorrow, but also with a determination to change the narrative for the better. Let's reflect on how we can all contribute to making this world a safer place, where no one else suffers in silence and no one's voice is ignored. The questions Amber's story raises are ones we must all grapple with. Was justice truly served in the end? Did Jeremy Gomez, and all those who participated in this cruel and brutal act, receive what they truly deserved? And, perhaps most hauntingly of all, is there more to this tragic case that the public still doesn't know? As we continue to reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, it's clear that the pursuit of truth and justice is far from over. What do you think? Do you feel justice was truly served? Or is there more beneath the surface that we still need to uncover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. Share your opinion, your thoughts, your experiences, because only when we all speak up can we create real change. Remember, awareness is the first step to change, and by subscribing, you are part of that change. Let's make the world a better, safer place for everyone.